The crosshair settled on a man's chest 2,410 meters away. Through the scope, barely more than a silhouette against the Afghan dawn. Wind holding at 9.2, Colonel Blackwood whispered beside her. Your green light, Phantom. Kira's finger moved to the trigger. Heart rate 44. Breathing controlled. 3.6 seconds between this moment and justice. But this shot, this impossible shot, had been 12 hours in the making, 12 hours earlier. The notification cut through the midnight silence of Kira's quarters at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, like a blade through flesh. She'd been awake anyway. Insomnia was an old companion, particularly on Sunday nights when the weight of accumulated missions pressed against her chest like a physical thing. She sat cross-legged on her bunk, the components of her Barrett M82 spread before her on a green field cloth. Every piece cleaned and inspected with the kind of obsessive precision that separated competent snipers from the ones who came home in flag-draped boxes. The rifle barrel gleamed under the harsh fluorescent light. 50 inches of matte black steel, worn smooth in specific places where her hands had gripped it thousands of times. This wasn't some safe queen locked away in an armory. This was a working weapon that had spoken with authority across Afghan mountainsides and Iraqi deserts, and it bore the scars to prove it. Serial number M82-051-TR was etched into the receiver. Most soldiers wouldn't know what those letters meant. Kiera knew them like she knew her own heartbeat. Thomas Raines, her father, 1st Marine Division, Desert Storm, 1991. He'd carried this rifle through the Kuwaiti desert, through sandstorms and oil fires, through chaos that he'd only spoken about in fragments before the cancer took him. The encrypted phone's screen cast cold blue light across her face as she read the message. No name, just a prefix that made her pulse quicken even as her expression remained absolutely neutral. JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command. They didn't call at midnight unless someone, somewhere, was about to have a very bad day. She answered on the second ring. Staff Sergeant Dalton. The voice on the other end was clipped, efficient, belonging to someone who'd made 1,000 calls like this and would make 1,000 more. Dalton, this is Colonel Matthews, JSOC Operations. You have a fragmentary order. Pack your gear. Wheels up in 4 hours. Her hand paused on the barrel assembly, but only for a heartbeat. Destination, sir? Afghanistan. FOB Atlas. That's all I can tell you over this line. Your orders are being transmitted now. This is classified at the highest level. Acknowledge. Acknowledge, sir. The line went dead. For exactly 3 seconds, Kira allowed herself to sit motionless, processing. Then she moved. Her hands worked with practiced efficiency, reassembling the Barrett with swift, economical movements. Each component slid into place with familiar mechanical precision. The rifle had become an extension of her body over 6 years of service. She could assemble it blindfolded, in sandstorms, in the dark, in the back of moving vehicles. Here, in the climate-controlled quiet of her quarters, it took less than 30 seconds. The hard case was already scarred and dented from a dozen deployments. Inside, custom foam padding cradled each component like a mother protecting her child. She secured the rifle, then turned to her deployment bag. 90% ready. That was the standard she maintained. Never be caught flat-footed when the call came. She added the essentials now. Extra uniforms in Army multicam, hygiene kit, personal medical supplies, the small waterproof notebook where she kept her range data and ballistic calculations. 6 years of information logged in her precise handwriting. Temperature variations, wind patterns, bullet performance at altitude, success rates, and yes, the failures too. Every shooter had them. The difference was whether you learned from them or pretended they never happened. But there was one more thing. Kira knelt beside her bunk and reached underneath, pulling out a small lockbox. Inside, wrapped in cloth that had once been part of her father's Marine Corps uniform, was a photograph. Thomas Raines in desert camouflage, 29 years old, standing beside his spotter somewhere in Kuwait. The photo had faded over 3 decades, colors washed out by time, but his smile was clear, confident, the smile of a man who knew exactly who he was and what he was capable of. She'd been 9 years old when he first took her shooting, not on some manicured range, but out in the Montana wilderness where he'd grown up, where his father had taught him. A bolt-action .22 rifle that was almost as tall as she was. She remembered the weight of it, the way her father's hands had guided hers, patient and calm. Shooting isn't about strength, Kira. It's about patience, breath control, understanding that the rifle is just a tool. Iron and wood don't win wars. Will and precision do. You're the real weapon. He taught her to read wind in the trees, to account for temperature, to respect the mathematics of ballistics while trusting her instincts. By the time she was 12, she could outshoot boys twice her age. By 16, she was winning regional competitions. By 21, she'd enlisted in the Army with one goal: to become a sniper like her father. The photograph went into her pocket, always did, every deployment. Her watch read 0447, wheels up in 3 hours and 13 minutes. Time to move. The C-130 Hercules was exactly as uncomfortable as every other military cargo flight Kiera had ever endured. She was the only passenger among pallets of supplies bound for various bases across Afghanistan. Ammunition, medical supplies, repair parts, all the endless logistics that kept a war machine running. The loadmaster, a staff sergeant who looked about 19 despite probably being mid-20s, offered her earplugs and a bottle of water before disappearing into the cockpit area. Alone with the cargo and the deafening roar of the engines, Kira pulled out her notebook. The pages were filled with data, but they were more than just numbers. Each entry represented a moment when everything had depended on her calculations being correct. Each one was a life saved or a threat eliminated. She reviewed her last qualification shoot from 3 weeks ago. Groups at 1,500 meters, all within a 6-inch spread. She'd been shooting well lately, body and mind in that rare state of perfect synchronization that separated good snipers from exceptional ones. But there was something else in the notebook too, something she hadn't shown anyone. On the inside back cover, written in her father's handwriting, transferred from a letter he'd sent during her basic training, were 4 words: trust your fundamentals always. He died 7 years ago. Cancer, the kind that came from breathing toxic smoke from burn pits during deployments. He'd made it home from Desert Storm, from Somalia, from Iraq, only to be killed by invisible poison years later. He'd lasted long enough to see her graduate basic training, but not long enough to see her earn her sniper tab. Not long enough to know that she'd become exactly what he'd trained her to be. She touched the words with her fingertip, then closed the notebook. The flight was 16 hours with 2 refueling stops. Kira slept in 45-minute increments, a skill she'd mastered years ago. When she was awake, she reviewed terrain maps on her tablet, studied ballistic tables, performed the mental exercises that kept her sharp. Bagram Airfield struck her like a physical force when she stepped off the transport. The Afghan heat was immediate and massive, wrapping around her like a living thing even in the early morning hours. The air smelled of dust and jet fuel and something else, that distinctive scent of a war zone. Burning trash and ancient earth and human desperation that every veteran recognized instantly. A young lieutenant with ranger tabs was waiting beside the aircraft. His uniform was crisp despite the heat, his bearing professional but friendly. Staff Sergeant Dalton? That's me, sir. Lieutenant Carver, I'm your liaison to get you to FOB Atlas. We have a Black Hawk waiting. He eyed her rifle case with professional interest. They said to expedite your movement, whatever you're here for must be important. Kira adjusted her grip on the case. Honestly, sir, I don't know what I'm here for. I was just told to show up. The Black Hawk flight took another 90 minutes, following valleys and ridgelines in a tactical flight pattern designed to minimize exposure to potential threats. Kira watched the landscape pass below through the open door, secured by her harness but leaning slightly out to sea. She'd been here before, had operated in these mountains. But the terrain never lost its harsh beauty or its danger. Afghanistan was a graveyard of empires, a land that had swallowed armies for thousands of years. The mountains were timeless, indifferent to human conflict, wearing away soldiers and nations with equal patience. Phobe Atlas appeared as they crested a ridge, a collection of reinforced buildings, HESCO barriers, and guard towers carved into a mountainside. The base was small, which meant it was either a logistics hub or a special operations forward point. Given her summons from JSOC, Kira suspected the latter. The helicopter flared and landed in a cloud of dust that turned the world briefly opaque. Kira jumped out the moment the wheels touched down, moving quickly away from the rotor wash with her gear secure. A sailor in Navy Type 3 camouflage was waiting at the edge of the landing zone. His bearing marked him as Special Operations, even without the SEAL Trident insignia visible on his chest. He didn't introduce himself, just nodded once. "Staff Sergeant Dalton, follow me. The Admiral is waiting." Admiral. Kira's mental assessment of the situation shifted immediately. Flag officers didn't typically involve themselves in individual soldier movements unless something significant was happening. Very significant. She followed the SEAL through a maze of barriers and sandbag walls, noting the increased security. Guards at every checkpoint, multiple layers of entry control, hardened facilities that suggested this base dealt with operations that didn't make it into official reports. They arrived at a nondescript building with reinforced walls and a cipher-locked door. Inside, the temperature dropped 20 degrees, thanks to industrial air conditioning units laboring against the Afghan heat. The SEAL led her down a corridor and stopped at a conference room entrance. "They're waiting for you inside, Staff Sergeant." He paused, then added quietly, "Good luck." He knocked twice and opened the door. Kira stepped into the room and felt every eye turn toward her like targeting lasers. At least 18 men sat around a large table covered with maps, satellite imagery, and tactical planning materials. All of them wore the tan uniforms of naval special warfare. All of them were SEALs, some of the most elite warriors in the American military. And she, in her Army multicam, was clearly not part of their brotherhood. The silence was immediate and heavy. At the head of the table sat a man whose presence dominated the room with natural authority that couldn't be taught or faked. Rear Admiral Garrett Shaw was in his early 60s, with steel gray hair cut high and tight. His face had been weathered by decades of sun and wind and combat, and his eyes missed absolutely nothing. 3 rows of ribbons on his chest told a story of service that spanned conflicts most Americans had forgotten. The Navy Cross sat at the top, multiple silver stars below it. Combat decorations from Desert Storm, Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan. A career written in valor and blood. Shaw looked up from a personnel file. Her file, Kira realized, and his expression hardened like concrete setting. The room's silence deepened. "Who the hell authorized this?" His voice carried command authority that demanded immediate obedience, cutting through the air like a sword. He slapped the file onto the table hard enough that the sound echoed off the walls. "Someone explain to me why, in the middle of the most critical mission of the year, command sends me a staff sergeant from Fort Campbell instead of a SEAL sniper." Kira stood at attention near the doorway, her face carefully neutral, but her mind was already working. She'd faced skepticism before, from instructors at sniper school who didn't think women belonged there, from conventional units who questioned special operations soldiers, from anyone who judged the book by its cover instead of reading the pages. She would let her skills do the talking. They always did. "At ease, Staff Sergeant." Shaw's tone suggested he was anything but at ease with the situation. "Take a seat." Kira moved to the only empty chair, positioned at the far end of the table, away from the Admiral. She set her rifle case carefully against the wall, noting how several of the SEAL's eyes followed the Barrett's distinctive profile. Good. Let them wonder. As she sat, she quickly scanned the satellite imagery spread across the table. Topographic maps of mountainous terrain, thermal imaging of a compound, target photographs. This was clearly a direct action mission, and from the detail level, it was being planned down to the second. Shaw stood, picking up a laser pointer with precise movement that spoke of decades in the field. "Gentlemen and Staff Sergeant, let me bring everyone up to speed." He clicked a remote and a photograph appeared on the screen, mounted on the wall. The image showed a bearded man in his mid-40s wearing traditional Afghan clothing. His eyes were cold, calculating, belonging to someone who'd seen violence and dealt it in equal measure. This is Khalid Rahman, Taliban's senior commander. He's responsible for coordinating attacks across 3 provinces, including the IED network that's killed 23 American soldiers in the past 6 months alone. Shaw's voice hardened with each word. He's also the architect behind multiple ambushes of our forces. Good men who didn't make it home because of him. The room's atmosphere grew heavier. Every man there had lost brothers in arms. This wasn't just another mission. This was personal, in the way that only military operations could be. A debt owed, a score to settle, justice delivered with precision. Shaw advanced the slides, showing more images of Rahman meeting with other insurgents, receiving weapons shipments, surveying terrain for future attacks. "Our intelligence assets have been tracking him for months, but he's smart, moves constantly, never sleeps in the same location twice, surrounds himself with experienced fighters who know their business." Another click brought up a satellite image of a compound nestled in a mountain valley. "Yesterday we got a break. Rahman is meeting with 2 other high-level commanders at this location. Our sources confirm he'll be there for exactly 48 hours before moving again. This is our window." Kira leaned forward slightly, her trained eye analyzing the topography. The compound sat in a natural fortress. Steep mountains on 3 sides. A narrow valley approach that would be a killing zone for any ground assault. Multiple defensive positions carefully sited for interlocking fields of fire. "Now here's our problem," Shaw continued, zooming in on the satellite image. "The compound is heavily defended. 20 to 30 fighters minimum, PKM machine guns, RPGs, and they've mined the approaches. A direct assault would result in unacceptable casualties, even for this target." He moved the laser pointer across the image, tracing a line from a ridge on the opposite side of the valley to the compound. "The only viable option is a precision strike. We eliminate Rahman, then the assault team moves in to exploit the chaos and capture or kill the other commanders." One of the SEAL team leaders, a lieutenant commander with a thick beard and a scar across his jawline, spoke up. His name tape read, Hollister. "Sir, what's the distance from the hide site to target?" Shaw's response was flat, matter of fact, 2,410 meters. The room erupted in low whistles and muttered comments. Kira kept her expression neutral, but her mind was already working through the calculations. Nearly 1.5 miles. At that distance, she'd need to account for significant bullet drop, wind deflection across multiple terrain features, the Coriolis effect from Earth's rotation, air density changes from altitude, and the downward angle of the shot. It was an extreme range shot, even for a .50 caliber round. "Exactly," Shaw continued, acknowledging the reactions. "Which is why I've spent the past week contacting every qualified long-range precision shooter in theater. The Marine scout sniper who made that 1,800-meter shot in Fallujah. He looked at the terrain and said the angle makes it impossible. Too steep. Too much vegetation blocking the sightline. The Army Special Forces sniper from 3rd Group, he calculated the wind variance in that valley and said we'd need a miracle." Shaw's eyes swept the room. "I had a SEAL chief with 15 years of experience tell me that even if someone could make the shot, The window of opportunity is too narrow. Rahman only exposes himself for about 90 seconds when he steps onto the balcony for morning prayers. 90 seconds to range, calculate, and fire. One chance. Miss, and he disappears for another 6 months while more Americans die. The Admiral turned his gaze directly to Kira, and she felt the weight of his scrutiny like a physical thing. So when command tells me they're sending the perfect shooter for this mission, I expect a SEAL with a proven record at extreme distance. Instead I get, he gestured toward her, the implication clear, an Army staff sergeant I've never heard of. Kira met his eyes steadily, refusing to look away. She understood his concern. Lives depended on this shot, and he didn't know her capabilities. Fair enough. But she also knew her record spoke for itself. If only he'd actually read it instead of just looking at her rank and uniform. Staff Sergeant Dalton, Shaw said, his tone shifting to interrogation mode. Your file says you qualified as an Army sniper 4 years ago. What's your longest confirmed kill? 1847 meters, sir. Helmand Province, 18 months ago. Confirmed by 2 spotters in aerial surveillance. Taliban weapons facilitator. Target was stationary or moving? Moving, sir. Walking across a compound courtyard. A few of the SEALs exchanged glances. An 1,800-meter shot on a moving target was genuinely impressive regardless of service branch. Mountain warfare experience? Shaw pressed. 16 months in the Hindu Kush, sir, operating at elevations between 8,000 and 12,000 feet. Familiar with the Barrett M82? Yes, sir. I've logged approximately 10,000 rounds through my weapon. I hand-load my own ammunition to ensure consistency. Shaw walked slowly around the table toward her, his expression unreadable in the way that senior officers learned after decades of command. The M82 is a heavy weapon. How do you handle recoil management on extended operations? Proper body position, sir. Technique over strength, and I train with it constantly. How many failed shots have you had in combat? Kira didn't hesitate. Honesty was a weapon too. 3, sir. 1 due to unexpected wind shift, 1 because the target moved behind cover during bullet flight time, and 1 because my spotter gave me incorrect range data. Shaw seemed slightly surprised by her candor. Most soldiers would have claimed perfection or found ways to deflect. Kira knew better. Every sniper who'd seen real combat had misses. The ones who claimed otherwise were either lying or hadn't been in enough fights. Lieutenant Commander Hollister leaned toward Shaw and whispered something. She couldn't hear the words, but she caught the skeptical expression, the subtle shake of his head. The message was clear enough. This was a mistake. Shaw nodded slightly, then turned back to Kira. His face carried something that might have been regret, but his voice was firm. Staff Sergeant, I appreciate your service and your candor, but this mission requires absolute precision under the worst possible conditions. I can't risk American lives on an unknown quantity, regardless of what your file says. He moved toward the door, the decision made. I'm going to contact command and request they send us someone with more experience at extreme range. Someone whose capabilities I can personally verify. I'm sure you understand. It's nothing personal. Kira stood smoothly. The movement was precise and controlled, the sound of her chair pushing back just loud enough to stop Shaw mid-step. Every eye in the room turned toward her again, but this time the quality of attention was different. Admiral. Her voice was quiet but carried perfectly through the silence. Permission to show you my weapon and credentials, sir. Something in her demeanor, the calm confidence, the absolute certainty that lived in her posture and tone, made Shaw pause. He was a man who'd built a career on reading people, on making split-second assessments of character and capability under pressure. He studied her face for a long moment, and Kira held his gaze without challenge or submission, just professional certainty. Finally, he gestured toward her rifle case. Granted, Staff Sergeant, show me what you've got. But before Kira could move to the case, the conference room door opened again. An older man entered, and the room's energy shifted immediately. He was in his late 60s, dressed in civilian clothes instead of uniform, but his bearing was unmistakably military. White hair cropped military short, a face weathered by decades of sun and wind and hard living. He moved with controlled precision despite his age, each step deliberate and economical. His eyes were the color of flint, and they swept the room with assessment that came from a lifetime of evaluating threats and opportunities. Admiral Shaw straightened slightly. "Gentlemen, this is Colonel Wyatt Blackwood, retired 4 years ago, but I called him back because nobody, and I mean nobody, reads wind in mountain terrain like granite." Granite. That was a call sign earned through experience, not given lightly. Shaw continued. "Colonel, you'll spot for whoever takes this shot." Blackwood surveyed the room, his gaze passing over the seals before landing on Kira. He saw the Army uniform, saw the female soldier in a room full of male special operators. His face hardened almost imperceptibly. "Admiral, with all due respect, I've spotted for SEAL snipers for 30 years. I'm not sure." He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes had locked onto Kira's rifle case sitting against the wall. He walked toward it slowly, his movements suddenly careful, almost reverent. The case was worn, battle-scarred, covered with stickers and markings that accumulated over years of deployments. But it was something specific that had caught his attention. Blackwood knelt beside the case, his hand trembling slightly as he reached out to touch something on its exterior. Numbers and letters etched into the hard plastic near the handle. His voice came out barely above a whisper. M82-051-TR. He looked up sharply at Kira, and she saw recognition in his eyes. Recognition in something else. Ghost pain. Memory. This was Thomas Raines's rifle. The room went absolutely silent. Kiera felt her pulse kick up despite her control. "My father, sir. 1st Marine Division, Desert Storm." Blackwood stood slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. His expression had transformed completely. Skepticism replaced by something deeper and more complex. "Thomas Raines. I knew him. Kuwait, 1991. We worked Overwatch together during the ground offensive." His voice grew thick with emotion that decades of military discipline couldn't quite suppress. "He was one of the finest Marines I ever served with. We held a position for 3 days outside Kuwait City. He..." Blackwood paused, collecting himself. "He saved my life. Spotted an Iraqi position I'd missed. His call prevented me from walking into an ambush." He looked back down at the rifle case, then up at Kira again. "I'm sorry for your loss. Thomas was a good man, a great Marine." "When did he?" 7 years ago, sir. Cancer from burn pit exposure." Blackwood nodded slowly, understanding in his face. Too many warriors survived the bullets only to be killed by poison years later. "He spoke of you, had a photograph in his kit. His daughter said he was teaching you to shoot." "Yes, sir. He started teaching me when I was 9. Then you were trained by the best." Blackwood turned to Admiral Shaw, and his entire demeanor had shifted. "Admiral, if Thomas Raines trained his daughter, if she carries his rifle, then she was taught by a master. I'll spot for her. It would be an honor." Shaw looked between Blackwood and Kira, reassessing. "Colonel, you're certain? Absolutely certain?" "Yes, sir. Thomas wouldn't have passed that rifle to someone who couldn't use it." Shaw was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "One chance, Staff Sergeant. Range test tomorrow at 0600. You make that shot, the mission is yours. You miss..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Kira came to attention. "Understood, sir. I won't miss." The mountain range sat at 8,400 feet, where the air was thin enough to make every breath a conscious effort, and cold enough that Kira's exhaled breath turned to vapor in the pre-dawn darkness. She'd been awake since 0300, running through mental calculations and equipment checks by the light of a red lens flashlight. Now, as the first gray light of false dawn touched the eastern peaks, She stood at the firing line with her Barrett M82 assembled and ready. The rifle rested on its bipod, the bubble level indicating perfect horizontal alignment. Behind her, she could hear the low murmur of voices as Admiral Shaw and 12 SEAL operators took positions with binoculars and spotting scopes, judging, waiting, expecting her to fail. Colonel Blackwood knelt beside her, setting up his own spotting scope with the careful precision of a man who'd done this 10,000 times before. His movements were economical, purposeful, free of wasted motion. In the growing light, she could see the lines on his face more clearly. Not just age, but the accumulated weight of decades spent in places where mistakes meant body bags and flag-draped coffins. "Ignore them," he said quietly, not looking up from his scope. "They're SEALs. They're supposed to be arrogant. It's in their DNA. You just focus on the fundamentals. Let the rifle do the talking." 2,000 meters downrange, a steel plate the size of a man's torso sat on a rocky outcrop. It was barely visible to the naked eye, just a dark smudge against the gray-brown mountainside. Through her scope at maximum magnification, Kira could make out its edges, the way morning shadows played across its surface. Behind her, she heard Lieutenant Commander Hollister's voice, pitched low but not quite low enough. "She'll miss. Women can't handle Barrett recoil at this altitude. Not enough upper body strength to maintain proper position through the shot." Another SEAL responded, quieter, but Kira caught the words anyway. "Admiral should have stuck to his guns. Called JSOC back. This is going to be a waste of time." Blackwood's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Just adjusted his spotting scope and pulled out a small notebook, its pages filled with decades of handwritten wind data and ballistic calculations. Admiral Shaw approached from behind, his boots crunching on the rocky ground. "Staff Sergeant Dalton, you may commence when ready. 5 rounds. I want to see consistency, not luck." Kira settled into her shooting position, left hand supporting the forend, right hand on the pistol grip, finger indexed along the receiver, not on the trigger. Cheek weld firm against the stock. Body at a 45-degree angle to the rifle to absorb recoil through skeletal structure rather than fighting it with muscle. "Wind?" she asked Blackwood. He was already reading the terrain, his eyes moving from near to far, cataloging every indicator, the way sparse vegetation moved at different distances. The shimmer of heat mirage beginning to rise as the sun touched the valley floor. The dust patterns near rock formations. 6.2 miles per hour, southwest. Thermals just starting to build. They'll push right as they rise. Call it 0.8 MOA right at 2,000 meters. Kira's mind processed the data automatically. 2,000 meters. Temperature 58 degrees Fahrenheit at this altitude. Barometric pressure lower than sea level. The bullet would drop approximately 420 inches, requiring 18.3 minutes of angle elevation adjustment. She dialed her scope turrets with precise clicks. Each one represented a quarter minute of angle, translating to a quarter inch of impact change at 100 yards, scaling up geometrically at distance. Her breathing slowed. 6 breaths per minute, heart rate dropping from its resting 55 beats per minute down toward 50. The crosshair settled on the steel plate, or rather it settled 18.3 MOA above the plate and 0.8 MOA to the left, trusting physics and mathematics to bend the bullet's path exactly where it needed to go. The world narrowed. There was only the reticle, the target, and the trigger. The trigger broke clean. The Barrett erupted. The recoil was massive, a physical blow that drove into her shoulder like a hammer strike. The muzzle blast kicked up a cloud of dust around her position. The sound echoed off the surrounding mountains, rolling away like thunder. Kira rode the recoil, her body position absorbing the impact through bone structure. She stayed on the scope, recovering quickly, watching for impact. 3.4 seconds of bullet flight time. "Miss," Blackwood called, his voice neutral. 4 inches low, 6 inches right. Wind pushed you more than expected. Thermals are stronger than I read. Behind her, Kira heard Hollister's voice, smug with vindication. Told you. Admiral Shaw said nothing, but she could feel his disappointment like a weight on her back. Kira's face remained expressionless. She worked the Barrett's bolt, the heavy mechanism cycling with mechanical precision. The spent .50 caliber casing ejected, tumbling through the air to land in the rocky dirt with a metallic clink. She chambered the second round and settled back into position. No emotion, no frustration, just cold analysis and adjustment. Blackwood was already recalculating. Correction, wind is actually 6.8 miles per hour in building. Thermals stronger than morning patterns suggested. Call it 1.2 MOA right. Kira adjusted her hold, trusting her spotter's read. The crosshairs shifted slightly left of her previous aim point. Breathing, heart rate, trigger press. The second shot broke clean. Recoil, recovery, watch, 3.4 seconds. The distant clang of metal on metal carried across the valley. Hit, Blackwood said, and now there was satisfaction in his voice. Center mass. Kira cycled the bolt. Third round. Same position, same breathing, same trigger control. Shot. Impact. Hit. 2 inches high, 1 inch right. Excellent. Fourth round. The rifle was a metronome now. Each shot a precise repetition of the fundamentals her father had drilled into her since she was 9 years old. Shot. Impact. Hit. Dead center. Fifth round. Her shoulder was beginning to ache. 68 pounds of recoil per shot, multiplied by 5, all concentrated into a few square inches of meat and bone. But pain was just information, and she had the discipline to ignore it. Shot. Impact. Hit. 1 inch low. 4 for 5 at 2,000 meters. Kira pulled back from the rifle and stood, her shoulder throbbing but her face neutral. She turned to face Admiral Shaw. The Admiral walked up slowly, his expression unreadable. The SEALs behind him had gone quiet. Even Hollister looked grudgingly impressed. 4 for 5 at 2,000, Shaw said. Not bad, Staff Sergeant. Better than not bad, actually. But the mission requirement is 2,410 meters. That's another 400 meters of wind, drop, and margin for error. He paused, seeming to consider whether to continue the test or call it here. Sir, Kira said, her voice steady, may I try 2,400? Shaw's eyebrow raised. There's no target at that distance. Kira pointed to a boulder on a distant ridgeline, barely visible even with binoculars. That rock outcrop, 2387 meters by my rangefinder, close enough to 2410 for a practical test. Shaw pulled out his own rangefinder, verified the distance. He was quiet for a long moment, weighing the decision. You can't even see if you hit it from here, he said finally. Blackwood spoke up. I can spot the impact, Admiral. Dust signature, spall pattern. I'll know. Shaw looked between them, then nodded curtly. One shot, Staff Sergeant. Make it count. Kira settled back into position. The boulder was at the very edge of her scope's useful magnification, just a dark shape against lighter rock, with no clear point of aim. She'd be shooting at a silhouette, trusting her calculations more than her eyes. Blackwood had already moved to his spotting scope, his magnification significantly higher than her rifle scope. He could see details she couldn't. Wind is shifting, he said, his voice taking on the calm, measured tone of a spotter calling a long-range shot. You've got variable conditions between here and there. See the dust at 1,500 meters? Kira shifted her scope to the midpoint, saw what he was describing. A small dust devil kicking up near a rocky outcrop. That's your tell, Blackwood continued. Thermal currents rising from that sunlit rock face. Wind at your position is 6 miles per hour southwest, but at mid-range it's accelerating to 8 miles per hour. Far target looks like 7 miles per hour based on vegetation movement. He paused, calculating. Average wind 7 miles per hour across the flight path. Mirage is boiling left, which confirms crosswind component. Temperature rising, it's 62 degrees now, will affect your ballistic coefficient slightly. Kira's mind was racing through the math. At 2387 meters, the bullet would drop approximately 550 inches. That was 19.2 minutes of angle elevation. The wind deflection at 7 miles per hour crosswind would push the bullet approximately 6.1 minutes of angle right. But there were other factors. The Coriolis effect from Earth's rotation added another 0.3 MOA at this latitude. The downward angle of the shot, firing from higher elevation to lower, reduced the effective range slightly, maybe 0.2 MOA less drop. Total solution? 19 MOA up, 6.4 MOA right. She dialed her turrets, feeling each click with her fingertips. Muscle memory and mathematics combined into something approaching instinct. Her breathing slowed to 4 breaths per minute, heart rate at 48 beats per minute and dropping. The crosshair settled into empty air, high and right of the distant boulder. She was aiming at nothing, trusting everything. The trigger broke. The Barrett roared. Recoil slammed her shoulder. She stayed in the scope, watching, but the target was too far to see impact with her magnification. 3.6 seconds of bullet flight. The entire world was silent except for the ringing in her ears from the muzzle blast. Then Blackwood's voice, quiet but carrying absolute certainty. Impact. Dead center. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Then one of the SEALs, a master chief with 20 years of service written in his weathered face, let out a low whistle. Holy shit, she actually made it. Admiral Shaw walked forward slowly, extending his hand. When Kira shook it, his grip was firm, his eyes direct. Welcome to the team, Staff Sergeant. Mission brief at 1400 hours. We've got work to do. The morning sun was fully up now, turning the Afghan mountains gold and bronze. Kira felt the tension drain from her shoulders, replaced by the deep ache of recoil punishment and the quiet satisfaction of a job done right. Blackwood was packing up his spotting scope, a slight smile on his weathered face. As the SEALs began to disperse, heading back to their vehicles, he leaned close enough that only she could hear. Your father would be so proud, Kira. That was Thomas Raines shooting through you. I saw it clear as day. The Tactical Operations Center was climate-controlled and filled with the low hum of electronics and hushed conversations. Kira entered at 13:55, 5 minutes early, as was her habit. Never be late, never be unprepared. The room had transformed since morning. The large table was now covered with detailed terrain maps, satellite imagery at multiple magnifications, weather forecasts, and tactical planning overlays. A dozen SEAL operators were already present, studying the materials with the focused intensity of men who knew their lives depended on understanding every detail. Admiral Shaw stood at the head of the table. Lieutenant Commander Hollister was to his right. Colonel Blackwood sat near the middle, reviewing a sheaf of meteorological data with the concentration of a man solving a complex equation. Kira took a seat near Blackwood. Several SEALs nodded to her as she sat. The atmosphere had changed. This morning she'd been an outsider, an unknown quantity, a potential liability. Now she was a proven asset. Not fully trusted yet, that would take time and shared hardship, but no longer dismissed. Shaw waited until exactly 1400, then began without preamble. Gentlemen and Staff Sergeant, we have 36 hours until mission execution. That's not a lot of time, so let's be efficient. He clicked a remote and the main screen displayed a high-resolution satellite image of the target compound. This is our objective. The compound sits in a valley at approximately 7,000 feet elevation, surrounded by peaks ranging from 9 to 11,000 feet. The nearest approach by ground is through this wadi here, he indicated with a laser pointer, but it's heavily mined and covered by interlocking fields of fire from these 3 positions. Kira studied the imagery carefully. The compound was roughly square, maybe 80 meters on each side. Two-story main building in the center, outbuildings that look like barracks or storage, a courtyard, and on the eastern side of the main building, a balcony. Khalid Rahman's pattern, according to our sources, is to perform morning prayers on this balcony, Shaw continued. He does this between 0730 and 0740 local time. Exposure time is 60 to 90 seconds, no more. He's paranoid about sniper threats, so he doesn't linger. Shaw zoomed in on the hide site across the valley. This is where our shooter and spotter will position. Distance to target, 2,410 meters. The shot angle is approximately 15 degrees downward. The hide site offers excellent concealment, but minimal cover. If you're discovered, there's no good way out except the way you came in. He looked directly at Kira. Staff Sergeant Dalton, this will be your position. Colonel Blackwood will spot for you. The assault team will be staged here and here, he indicated positions on the map, waiting for your shot to initiate the operation. Once Rahman is down, the assault team fast ropes from Blackhawks, secures the compound, and exploits any intelligence materials on site. Shaw advanced to the next slide, showing a detailed timeline. Infiltration begins at 03:15 tomorrow. You'll have approximately 4 hours to move into position under cover of darkness. First light is at 0650. Target window opens at 0730. One shot, one chance. Questions? Kira raised her hand. Sir, what's the backup plan if I miss? Shaw's expression was grim. There is no backup plan, Staff Sergeant. If you miss, Rahman goes to ground, and we've lost our best opportunity in 6 months. More Americans die while we wait for another opening that may never come. The weight of that statement settled over the room like a lead blanket. Sir, Kira said carefully, I won't miss. But I need to know, if something goes wrong on my end, mechanical failure, injury, whatever, do we abort or does someone else take the shot? Shaw considered this. Colonel Blackwood is qualified and could attempt it, but he's 69 years old and hasn't made a shot like this in a decade. If you're incapacitated, we abort and extract. The mission succeeds or fails with you. Kira nodded. No pressure. Lieutenant Commander Hollister spoke up, his tone professional now, free of the morning's skepticism. Staff Sergeant, I'll be leading the assault element. I need to know, what's your confidence level on this shot, percentage-wise? Kira met his eyes. Sir, if I say 100%, I'm either lying or delusional. No shot at this range is certain. There are too many variables. But I'd say 75 to 80%, assuming conditions are close to forecast. Hollister nodded, appreciating the honesty. That's a better answer than, I got this, would have been. Thank you. The briefing continued for another hour. Infiltration routes, radio frequencies, challenge and password codes, actions on contact if they encountered enemy forces, medical evacuation procedures. Every detail that could be planned, accounted for, war-gamed. As the meeting broke up, Kira felt a hand on her shoulder. Admiral Shaw pulled her aside, away from the dispersing SEALs. Staff Sergeant, I owe you an apology. This morning I let my assumptions override my judgment. I saw your rank and your gender, and I made a call based on prejudice, not evidence. Sir, you were being cautious. I understand. No, Shaw said firmly. I was being lazy. I took the easy path of assumption instead of doing my homework. Your file is impressive as hell, and I should have read it more carefully before I opened my mouth. Colonel Blackwood set me straight, but I should have known better. He paused, his voice softening. I also want you to know, my godson is Lieutenant Cole Hollister, Wade's younger brother. He was on that SEAL team in Kandahar 18 months ago. Kira felt her stomach tighten. She knew where this was going. Cole called me last night, Shaw continued. He'd heard through channels that you were here, wanted me to pass along a message. He said his daughter just turned 2 years old, said he gets to watch her grow up because someone made 6 impossible shots through a compound wall in 12 seconds. He wanted me to thank the shooter who saved his life. Shaw extended his hand again, and this time there was emotion in his weathered face. Thank you, Staff Sergeant, from a godfather and from everyone who loves the people you brought home safe. Kira shook his hand, feeling the weight of it. Just doing my job, sir. No, Shaw said quietly. You're doing it better than almost anyone else can, which is why this mission is yours. Make it count. The barracks were quiet when Kira returned to prepare her gear. Most of the base was in afternoon downtime, the lull between daytime operations and evening briefings. She sat on her bunk with her deployment bag open, methodically checking each piece of equipment. Ammunition. She pulled out 3 boxes, each containing 20 rounds of hand-loaded Federal .50 caliber, 660-grain projectiles, each one weighed to within .1 grains of specification. She'd loaded these rounds herself 6 months ago, testing multiple powder charges and seeding depths until she found the combination that produced the tightest groups. She opened the first box and began weighing each round with a digital scale accurate to .1 grains. Out of 20 rounds, 3 were outside her tolerance window. Those went into a separate container. Not bad, but not good enough for a mission like this. Only perfection would do. Medical supplies, 2 tourniquets, pressure bandages, hemostatic gauze, morphine auto-injectors. At the distances she'd be operating, if something went seriously wrong, she'd have to save her own life until extraction could reach her. A knock on the door interrupted her inventory. Come in. Lieutenant Commander Hollister entered, closing the door behind him. He held 2 cups of coffee, the thick, military-issue stuff that tasted like diesel fuel but delivered caffeine like a tactical airstrike. Peace offering, he said, handing her one, for being an asshole this morning. Kira accepted the coffee. You were doing your job, sir, looking out for your team. Maybe, but I was also being a judgmental prick. Hollister sat down on the footlocker across from her bunk. I saw the army uniform and the female soldier, and I made assumptions. That's on me. He sipped his coffee, grimaced at the taste. For what it's worth, that 2,400-meter shot this morning was the most impressive piece of marksmanship I've seen in 15 years as a SEAL, and I've worked with some seriously gifted shooters. Thank you, sir. Hollister was quiet for a moment, then gestured to her uniform hanging on a wall hook, the various badges and insignia clearly visible. I need to ask you something. Those badges, the Distinguished International Shooter Badge, the Presidential Service Badge, those aren't just for show. You've operated at levels most soldiers never reach. And that silver bullet pin, I've only seen that a handful of times, and every person wearing one had made a shot that became legend. He leaned forward. You're Phantom, aren't you? The shooter from Kandahar. Kira was quiet, weighing how to respond. The Kandahar operation was classified. Someone made 6 kills through a compound wall in 12 seconds from 1,800 meters. Saved the entire team. He stood, moved to the door, then turned back. My brother was on that team, Lieutenant Cole Hollister. He came home to his wife because of you. The Admiral already told you, but I wanted to say it myself. Thank you. Whatever happens tomorrow, you've already saved one man who matters more to me than anything in this world. Kira, for what it's worth, you earned my respect twice now. Once for saving Cole, and once for not throwing that in the Admiral's face this morning when he was doubting you. You could have pulled rank, dropped the Phantom card, made us all look like idiots, but you let your skills speak instead. That's class. After Hollister left, Kira sat in silence for a long time, staring at her father's photograph. Thomas Raines in his desert camouflage, young and confident and alive. She pulled out her notebook and turned to the entry from Kandahar, the mission that had earned her the nickname she'd never asked for. Kandahar, March 2021. SEAL Team 6 extraction. 6 targets, 12 seconds. Shots through 12-inch mud brick wall. Wind 8 miles per hour variable. Temperature 74 degrees Fahrenheit. Success. Below that in smaller writing, Lieutenant Hollister confirmed safe extraction, mission success. She hadn't known his first name was Cole, hadn't known he had a brother in the same community, hadn't known about the daughter who was now 2 years old. But that was the job. You took the shot, saved the lives you could, and rarely learned how the story ended for the people you protected. Until moments like this. Kira closed the notebook and resumed her equipment check. There was work to do. At 1800 hours, Master Chief Leon Murphy found her on the range, test-firing the last of her ammunition selection. Murphy was a massive man, 6'4" and built like a linebacker, with a thick black beard and eyes that missed nothing. "Staff Sergeant," he called, waiting for her to finish her shot sequence before approaching. Kiera pulled back from her rifle, safed it, and turned to face him. "Master Chief." Murphy held a tablet displaying weather data and satellite imagery. "We've got a problem. Intel update just came through. Rahman's moving his timeline. Instead of staying at the compound for 48 hours, he's leaving tomorrow afternoon. Our window just compressed from 36 hours to approximately 18 hours." Kira felt her pulse quicken, but kept her expression neutral. "So the mission executes tomorrow morning as planned, but with less prep time." "Exactly. Admiral Shaw wants you and Colonel Blackwood in the TOC at 1900 for updated weather brief and final planning. We're also going to run through communications protocols one more time. After that, you'll have about 6 hours to sleep before infiltration begins at 0315. Murphy paused, his weathered face serious. "I've been doing this for 22 years, Staff Sergeant. I've worked with a lot of snipers. What you did this morning, that 2,400-meter shot, that's top tier. But I need to know you understand the stakes here. This isn't just another mission. Rahman has killed a lot of Americans, good people. And if we miss this chance, he disappears and the killing continues." "I understand, Master Chief," Murphy nodded. "I believe you do. One more thing. Colonel Blackwood asked me to give you this." He handed her a small leather-bound notebook, old and worn, its pages filled with handwritten entries going back decades. "That's Blackwood's wind-reading journal. 40 years of knowledge. He said you might want to study it tonight, learn how he reads terrain in these mountains." Kira accepted the journal carefully, feeling the weight of history in her hands. "Thank you, Master Chief." Murphy turned to leave, then stopped. "Your old man, Thomas Raines. I never met him, but I know Marines who served with him in Desert Storm. They said he was one of the best. Said he had a gift for long-range shooting that bordered on supernatural. I'm glad to see the gift lives on." After Murphy left, Kira opened Blackwood's journal. The first entry was dated 1983, somewhere in Central America during operations that probably weren't officially acknowledged even now. Page after page of wind observations, terrain analysis, shot calculations. A lifetime of experience condensed into cramped handwriting and hand-drawn diagrams. She turned to entries from Kuwait, 1991. Found one dated February 26th. Kuwait, outside Kuwait City. Working overwatch with Marine sniper Thomas Raines. Wind highly variable, 12 to 18 miles per hour from multiple directions due to terrain features. Temperature 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Raines made 1,600 meters shot on Iraqi sniper who had me pinned. Perfect execution under pressure. This man is the best wind reader I've ever worked with. He saved my life today. Below that, added later in different ink, Thomas Raines, K.I.A. February 29th, 1991. 3 days after he saved me. Never got to buy him that beer. Never forgot what I owed him. Kira closed the journal, her throat tight. The connections ran deeper than she'd known. Her father had saved Blackwood. Blackwood was now helping her, and tomorrow they'd take a shot to eliminate the man who'd killed Blackwood's son. 3 generations of warriors, bound together by violence and sacrifice, and the strange mathematics of who lives and who dies. She looked at her watch. 1850. 10 minutes until the final planning brief. Time to move. The Tactical Operations Center was more crowded than before. Admiral Shaw stood at the head of the table with the base meteorologist, a young Air Force captain whose expertise was reading weather patterns in mountain terrain. The forecast has shifted slightly, the captain was saying as Kira entered and took her seat beside Blackwood. We're looking at clear conditions tomorrow morning, which is good, but wind patterns are going to be challenging. He pulled up a graphic showing predicted wind speeds at various altitudes and locations across the valley. At your position, expect 6 to 9 miles per hour from the southwest at dawn. But here's the tricky part. There's a low-pressure system moving through that's going to create variable conditions. Mid-valley, you could see winds up to 12 miles per hour. Far target area, probably 8 to 10 miles per hour. Blackwood was studying the data intently, making notes in a small pad. "What about thermals?" he asked. "Strong," the captain replied. "Clear skies mean rapid heating once the sun touches the valley floor. You'll have significant thermal rise, especially between 0730 and 0800, which is exactly your target window." "Fantastic," Blackwood muttered. "So we've got variable wind, strong thermals, and a target who only exposes himself for 90 seconds. This just keeps getting better." Shaw addressed the room. "All of which is why we've got the best shooter and spotter available. Staff Sergeant Dalton, Colonel Blackwood, can you work with these conditions?" Kira looked at Blackwood. He met her eyes and gave a slight nod. "Yes, sir," she said. "It'll be challenging, but manageable. We'll adjust in real time based on what we observe." "Good. Lieutenant Commander Hollister, run through the assault timeline." Hollister stood, moved to the map. "My team will stage here, approximately 3 kilometers from the compound. We'll have 2 Blackhawks on standby at this LZ. Once we get confirmation of target down from Overwatch, that's Dalton and Blackwood, we'll lift and fast rope onto the compound roof. Estimated time from shot to boots on target, 4 minutes. He traced the assault route with his finger. "We breach here and here, clearing the main building first. Priority is securing any intelligence materials, computers, documents, phones. Secondary targets are the 2 other commanders who are supposed to be meeting with Rahman. We want them alive if possible, dead if necessary." Shaw nodded. "Time on target?" "No more than 12 minutes, Hollister said. "We'll be exposed, so speed is critical. Extract by the same Blackhawks, wheels up within 15 minutes of initial insertion." "And the sniper team extraction?" Shaw asked. "Separate route," Hollister replied. "They'll egress on foot back to the primary LZ, where a 3rd Blackhawk will pick them up. Timing is flexible based on when they can safely move without compromise." The briefing continued for another 90 minutes. Every detail examined, every contingency planned. Communications protocols, medical evacuation procedures, actions on contact with unexpected enemy forces. Finally, at 2100 hours, Shaw called it. "Gentlemen and Staff Sergeant, we're as ready as we're going to be. Get food, get rest. Infiltration team musters at 0300. Dismissed." As the room cleared, Blackwood pulled Kira aside. "Walk with me." They stepped outside into the cool Afghan night. The sky was crystalline clear, stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. In the distance, mountains rose like black teeth against the starfield. Blackwood was quiet for a long time, just walking, hands clasped behind his back. Finally, he spoke. "There's something I need to tell you, something that's going to come out in tomorrow's final brief, and I wanted you to hear it from me first." Kiera waited. Khalid Rahman, the target, he wasn't always just a name to me. Shaw pulled up classified files this afternoon, cross-referenced Rahman's operational history against American casualties going back 15 years. Blackwood's voice was steady, but Kira could hear the emotion beneath the control. Operation Sandstorm, September 2011. 75th Ranger Regiment Patrol got ambushed in Kandahar Province. 4 KIA. Rahman planned it, coordinated it, watched it happen. He stopped walking, turned to face her. My son was one of those four. Captain Nathaniel Blackwood. He was 29 years old. Ranger School honor graduate. Everything a father could want. Kira felt her chest tighten. The photograph in Blackwood's journal made sudden, terrible sense. Sir, I'm so sorry. I was deployed to Iraq at the time, Blackwood continued, his voice thick now. I kept telling myself I'd train him when my deployment ended. Teach him everything Thomas taught me, everything I'd learned in 40 years. The old school techniques that keep you alive when technology fails. His voice cracked. I never got the chance. I came home to a flag ceremony and a folded triangle. And the man who killed him is still breathing. Kira understood now. This wasn't just a mission for Blackwood. This was personal in the deepest, most painful way possible. Then we make sure tomorrow counts, she said quietly. For Nathaniel, for my father, for all of them. Blackwood nodded, composing himself. Tomorrow morning, when you're behind that rifle and the moment comes, I need you to know that this isn't about revenge for me. Not anymore. I'm 69 years old. I've made my peace with losing Nathaniel. But what I couldn't make peace with was the thought of dying without passing on what I know. The knowledge that could save the next generation. He looked at her directly. Working with you these past 2 days, teaching Thomas Raines's daughter the things I never taught my own son, that's given me something I thought I'd lost. Purpose. The chance to honor both their memories by making sure the skills survive. Kira didn't trust herself to speak, so she just nodded. Get some sleep, Staff Sergeant, Blackwood said. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. But sleep was elusive. Kira lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, running through calculations in her mind. 2,410 meters. Variable wind. Strong thermals. 90-second window. At 2,200 hours, she gave up trying to sleep and returned to the range. The night was cool and quiet, the range deserted. She assembled her Barrett by the light of a red lens flashlight and began a final test sequence. 68 rounds over the next 2 hours. Different ranges, different positions. Testing her body's memory, her equipment's consistency, her ability to make rapid adjustments based on changing conditions. The final shot was number 68, 2,000 meters in darkness, using night vision and infrared laser designator. The distant clang of impact on steel was satisfying, but her shoulder was screaming now. Each recoil had accumulated, and the pain was building towards something she couldn't ignore. She broke down the rifle, packed it carefully, and headed to the medical tent. The on-duty medic was a young specialist who looked barely old enough to shave. Staff Sergeant, it's 2,200 hours. Everything okay? I need you to check my right shoulder. It's been bothering me. The medic had her remove her shirt and began palpating the joint. His hands were gentle but thorough, pressing specific points, checking range of motion. Raise your arm. Good. Now rotate. Does this hurt? Yes. How about this? Yes. The medic's expression grew concerned. He pulled out a portable ultrasound unit and began scanning the joint. After several minutes of silence, he looked up. Staff Sergeant, you've got a partial rotator cuff tear. Pretty significant one, and there's inflammation throughout the joint. How long has this been bothering you? About 6 months. Gets worse after heavy shooting days. Have you been getting treatment? Some. Physical therapy when I can. The medic shook his head. Ma'am, this needs surgery. And you need to stop shooting immediately or you risk a complete tear. If that happens, you're looking at permanent damage. Career-ending damage. Kira felt ice in her stomach. How many more shots can I take before that happens? The medic looked uncomfortable. I can't tell you that. Could be 1 shot, could be 3, could be 10. But every shot you take is rolling the dice. Eventually, your luck runs out. But I could take 1 more shot, maybe 2. Staff Sergeant, I really can't. I'm not asking for a guarantee. I'm asking for your professional opinion. 1 or 2 more shots. Possible or not, The medic was quiet for a long moment. Possible? Yes, but I'm documenting this examination in your medical record, and I'm noting that I advise you to cease all shooting activities immediately pending surgical evaluation. Kira pulled her shirt back on. Understood, Doc. Thanks for the honesty. Ma'am, please, whatever you're planning. I heard you perfectly, Doc. One shot, one kill. That's all I need. She left the medical tent and walked back to her barracks in the darkness, her shoulder throbbing with every step. One shot, one chance. And after tomorrow, her career as a sniper would be over, whether the mission succeeded or failed. She thought about her father, who'd given her this rifle and this calling. She thought about Blackwood's son, who died without learning the skills that might have saved him. She thought about the 23 Americans Rahman had killed, and the families who'd never see their loved ones again. One shot. It would have to be perfect. At 0200, Kira finally slept, her dreams filled with crosshairs and mountain winds, and her father's voice repeating those 4 words. Trust your fundamentals, always. The alarm vibrated against Kira's wrist at 0245, 15 minutes before muster. She was already awake, had been for the past hour, lying in the darkness and running through mental calculations. Wind holds, elevation adjustments, the geometry of death delivered at extreme range. Her shoulder throbbed with a deep, persistent ache that no amount of ibuprofen could fully suppress. She'd taken 4 pills at midnight, the maximum safe dose, knowing she'd need every advantage when the moment came. The pain was manageable now, but she knew what waited. The Barrett's recoil would be catastrophic. The medic's words echoed in her mind. Complete tear, permanent damage, career over. One shot, make it count. She dressed in the darkness, pulling on her Army multicam uniform with practiced efficiency. Every movement deliberate, every piece of gear placed exactly where muscle memory expected to find it. She'd done this ritual dozens of times before dozens of missions, but this time felt different. Final. The Barrett waited in its hard case, already packed and ready. She ran her hand along the scarred exterior, feeling the etched serial number under her fingertips. M82-051-TR, Thomas Raines. Her father's weapon, now hers, soon to fire its last shot in anger. She pulled out the photograph one more time. Her father in desert camouflage, young and confident and alive. She touched his face through the faded paper. I won't miss, Dad. I promise. The photograph went into her pocket. Always. At 0255, she shouldered her gear and headed for the muster point. The pre-dawn darkness was absolute, the kind of black that only exists in remote places far from civilization's light pollution. The stars overhead were so dense they formed a continuous field of light, the Milky Way a river of luminescence cutting across the sky. At the designated rally point, 3 MRAPs sat with engines idling, their exhaust visible in the cold air. Lieutenant Commander Hollister stood beside the lead vehicle with his SEAL team, 8 operators in full kit with night vision mounted and weapons ready. They looked like creatures from another world, all sharp angles and tactical purpose. Colonel Blackwood was already there, checking his gear with methodical precision. At 69 years old, he moved with the careful economy of someone who knew his body's limitations, but refused to acknowledge them. He saw Kira approach and nodded once. Ready? Ready. Admiral Shaw emerged from the TOC, accompanied by Master Chief Murphy. Shaw's face was grim in the red light from the building's entrance. Final weather check came through 5 minutes ago, he said without preamble. Conditions are holding as forecast. Clear skies, variable wind 6 to 12 miles per hour, strong thermal activity expected after sunrise. About as good as we're going to get for a shot like this. He looked at Kira directly. This is your last chance to back out, Staff Sergeant. No shame in it. This is an impossible shot by any reasonable standard. Kira met his eyes steadily. With respect, sir, I didn't come to Afghanistan to back out. I came to work. Shaw's weathered face creased into something that might have been a smile. I was hoping you'd say that. Mount up. You've got 4 hours to get into position. The convoy rolled out at 03:15 exactly. 3 MRAPs moving without lights through mountain passes that dropped away into darkness on both sides. Kira sat in the back of the lead vehicle with Blackwood, both of them silent, mentally preparing for what came next. The SEALs maintained professional quiet, speaking only when necessary over encrypted radios. Hollister sat across from Kira, his face invisible behind night vision goggles, but she could feel his attention. He was running through his own mental checklist, preparing for the assault that would follow her shot. The drive took 2 hours, following valleys and ridgelines, avoiding known Taliban positions in areas where IEDs had been found before. The route had been planned and rehearsed, but no plan survived first contact with reality, and these mountains had been killing soldiers for thousands of years. At 05:20, the convoy stopped 3 kilometers from the objective. Time to go foot mobile. Hollister gathered his team with hand signals. The SEALs moved with practiced efficiency, checking equipment, adjusting loads, preparing for the hardest part of any mission, the approach. Kira pulled her Barrett's case from the vehicle and secured it across her back. 65 pounds of rifle, optic, and ammunition. The weight settled onto her shoulders like an old friend. Blackwood carried the spotting scope and support equipment, moving beside her with surprising grace for his age. "Last 1,000 meters on foot," Hollister whispered, his voice barely audible even in the quiet night. "Stick to the route we planned. Watch for tripwires. Stay quiet. Move slow. We've got time." They moved in tactical file, night vision turning the world into shades of green. The terrain was rocky and broken, requiring careful foot placement with every step. One loose stone, one stumble, and the sound would carry across the valley like a gunshot. Kira's shoulder protested the weight of the rifle case with each step, sending sharp reminders of the partial tear waiting to become complete. She ignored it. Pain was just information, and she had the discipline to set it aside. They were 800 meters from the planned hide site when Blackwood's fist came up, the signal for immediate halt. Everyone froze instantly, becoming statues in the darkness. Kira heard it a second later, voices speaking Pashto, moving along the ridge above their position. Through her night vision, she saw them. 9 Taliban fighters walking a patrol route that would bring them within 20 meters if they continued. Hollister's hand signals were clear and urgent. "Go prone. Weapons ready. Prepare to engage if compromised." The team melted into the ground, becoming part of the landscape. Kira lowered herself slowly, carefully, feeling every rock and depression through her body. Her hand moved to her M4 carbine, finger moving from the trigger guard to the trigger. If shooting started, she'd engage the closest threat first, trust the SEALs to handle the others. The patrol moved closer. 25 meters, 20, 15. Through her night vision, Kira could see individual faces now. Young men, most of them, probably local fighters who knew these mountains better than any American ever would. They carried AK-47s with the casual familiarity of people who'd grown up around weapons. One of them stopped, looking directly toward the team's position. He said something to his companions, gestured with his rifle. For a terrible moment, Kira thought they'd been spotted. Her heart rate was 52 beats per minute, elevated from exertion but still controlled. Beside her, Blackwood was absolutely motionless, not even appearing to breathe. Old fieldcraft from decades of operations in hostile territory. The Taliban fighter who'd stopped pulled out a cigarette, lit it with a lighter that flared bright green through night vision. The ember glowed like a beacon as he inhaled. He was 12 meters away, close enough that Kira could hear his breathing. The fighters gathered around him, passing the cigarette, talking in low voices. They were in no hurry. This was their territory, their mountains. They had no reason to suspect that 8 American operators and 1 Army sniper were frozen in the darkness less than 15 meters away. 2 minutes passed, then 5. One of the fighters sat down on a rock 8 meters from Kira's position. He pulled out a phone, the screen's glow illuminating his face in the darkness. Kira could hear tinny music playing from the device's speaker, a woman's voice singing in Pashto. Another fighter laughed at something, clapped his companion on the shoulder. They were relaxed, comfortable. This was routine patrol for them, not a hunt. 7 minutes. Kira's right calf began to cramp, the muscle seizing in a knot of fire. She couldn't shift position, couldn't flex the muscle, could only endure and will the pain to background noise. Beside her, she felt Blackwood's hand on her shoulder, not moving, just there, a reminder that she wasn't alone, that he was with her through this. 10 minutes. The fighter with the phone stood, stretched, said something that made the others laugh. He looked directly at the depression where Kira and the team lay hidden, his eyes sweeping across their position. Kira's finger rested on her M4's trigger. If he saw them, if he raised his rifle, she'd have perhaps half a second to fire first. The fighter's gaze moved on. He hadn't seen them. 12 minutes. Finally, mercifully, their radio crackled. A voice speaking Pashto, giving orders. The fighters responded, gathered their gear. One last look around the area, then they moved out, voices fading into the mountain darkness. 14 minutes total. When they were finally gone, Kira allowed herself one long, shaking breath. Hollister waited another 10 minutes before signaling movement, making sure the patrol was truly gone and not doubling back. When the team finally stood and continued forward, Kira's legs trembled slightly from the prolonged stress position. She forced them steady through will alone. "That was too fucking close," one of the SEALs whispered. Hollister's response was barely audible. "Move faster, move quieter, we're behind timeline." They reached the hide site at 0628, nearly 30 minutes later than planned. Dawn was still 22 minutes away, but the eastern sky was already beginning to gray with false light. The position was a shallow depression in the rocky terrain, barely large enough for 2 people lying prone. Sparse vegetation provided concealment but minimal cover. If they were discovered here, there was no good way out except the way they'd come. But the sight line was perfect. Across the valley, 2,410 meters away, the target compound was visible as a dark shape against lighter terrain. As the light grew, Kira could make out more details through her scope. The 2-story main building, the courtyard, the balcony on the eastern side where Khalid Rahman would appear in approximately 67 minutes. Blackwood low-crawled the final 50 meters to the shooting position, moving with the patience of a man who'd done this 1,000 times before. Kira followed, pulling the Barrett in its drag bag, distributing the weight to avoid creating obvious disturbance in the terrain. They arranged equipment with obsessive precision. The Barrett positioned on its bipod, bubble level confirming perfect horizontal alignment. Kira's ballistic computer within easy reach. The rangefinder. 5 rounds of her best ammunition, each one weighed and verified. Blackwood's spotting scope positioned 2 feet behind and slightly left, giving him a complimentary view of the target area without interfering with Kira's sight picture. As false dawn began to gray the eastern sky, Blackwood pointed out terrain features, his voice a whisper that barely carried the 2 feet between them. "See those prayer flags at 1150 meters? Watch how they move. That's your primary wind indicator." He traced an imaginary line through the air with his finger. "The dust near that building at 1600 shows thermal currents. Those trees at 800 will tell you if the wind shifts direction." This was the education Kira had asked for. Reading the land the way snipers had done before technology existed. The kind of knowledge that couldn't be taught in a classroom or learned from a manual. "This valley behaves like the Kuwait deserts," Blackwood continued quietly. "Same heat patterns, same wind evolution as the sun rises. I've seen it before." They watched the compound emerge from darkness as dawn broke. Guards became visible on the perimeter, walking predictable patrol routes. Two Toyota trucks with PKM machine guns mounted in the beds. The balcony was empty but clear, exactly as intelligence had described. At 0650, Kira began her final equipment check. She'd done this ritual hundreds of times, but muscle memory didn't make it less important. Every piece had to be perfect. Scope turrets zeroed and verified. Parallax adjustment confirmed. Bubble level reading true horizontal. Bipod legs locked solid. Chamber clean. Bolts cycling smoothly. She loaded the first round, feeling the cartridge slide home with mechanical precision. The weight of it, the promise of it. 660 grains of copper and lead that would carry justice across nearly a mile and a half of air. At 0715, movement on the balcony made Kira's finger move toward the trigger guard, but Blackwood's hand touched her shoulder lightly. Guards checking the area, not our target. Two Taliban fighters stepped onto the balcony, scanned the surrounding mountains with binoculars. One of them looked directly toward the hide site, and Kira forced herself to remain absolutely still. At this distance, with their camouflage and position, they were effectively invisible. But movement would give them away instantly. The guards completed their sweep and withdrew inside. 67 minutes, Blackwood whispered. Rahman's pattern is consistent. He'll come between 0730 and 0745. Kira began her final mental preparation. The calculations were done. The equipment was ready. Now it was about achieving the mental state that made impossible shots possible. The clarity, the focus, the absolute certainty that the fundamentals would carry through. Her breathing slowed to 6 breaths per minute. Heart rate dropped toward 48. The world narrowed to the scope picture, the wind indicators, the mathematics of death delivered at extreme range. At 0721, the wind picked up suddenly. Kira felt it on her face before the indicators showed the change. A shift from southwest to west-southwest. Speed increasing from 6 miles per hour to 9. Wind change, Blackwood confirmed, his Kestrel weather meter reading the shift. 9.2 miles per hour now, west-southwest. That's a 15-degree direction change. Kira's carefully prepared calculations were suddenly invalid. The wind shift changed everything. Deflection, drift, the complex interaction of air currents along the bullet's path. She had maybe 14 minutes before the expected target window. 14 minutes to recalculate everything. She pulled out her notebook and began running new numbers. Her hands were steady despite the pressure, her mind processing rapidly. 2,410 meters. New wind speed 9.2 miles per hour. New direction west-southwest instead of southwest. Temperature had risen to 64 degrees. Humidity dropping. Blackwood provided real-time observations, his voice calm and steady. Prayer flags showing steady 9 miles per hour. Dust pattern confirms west-southwest. Mirage indicates thermals are rising strong, stronger than yesterday. New solution. The numbers came together in her mind like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Hold 6.4 MOA right for wind instead of the 5.8 she'd calculated last night. The difference was massive at this range, nearly 5 feet of deviation if she used the wrong calculation. Your computer is showing 6.2 MOA, Blackwood said, reading over her shoulder. My eyes say 6.5. Split the difference? Kira looked at him, nodded. 6.4. Trust the average when technology and fieldcraft disagree. She made the adjustment, clicking her scope's windage turret. Each click was precise, mechanical, moving her point of impact exactly where it needed to be. 18 clicks right, each one representing a quarter minute of angle at 100 yards, scaling up to inches and feet at 2,400 meters. At 0734, the balcony door opened. 3 men emerged, 2 guards flanking a central figure. Through the scope, Kira compared the central figure to the intelligence photographs burned into her memory. Wrong build, wrong beard pattern. This was a local Taliban subcommander, Someone important, but not their target. Her finger stayed off the trigger. Discipline absolute. The men performed morning prayers, then withdrew inside after 3 minutes. Blackwood's voice was calm, steady, not him. Patience. Kira's shoulder was beginning to ache from maintaining position. 48 minutes prone behind the Barrett, muscles locked in place, breathing controlled. But pain was just information, and she had the discipline to ignore it. At 0738, the door opened again. 2 guards stepped out, checked the perimeter, spoke into radios. They withdrew without anyone else appearing. False alarm number 2. He's being cautious, Blackwood observed, sending people out first to check for threats. Smart man. Smart men are harder to kill, Kira replied quietly, but not impossible. At 0741, the balcony door opened a 3rd time. 2 guards emerged first, taking positions flanking the doorway. Then a 3rd figure stepped out between them, moving with the confidence of command. He wore traditional Afghan clothing, a distinctive beard visible even at this distance. Kira's crosshairs settled on him as he walked to the balcony railing. Through the scope, she compared every feature to the intelligence photographs. Beard pattern matched, build matched, the way he carried himself matched, height estimated at 5'10", matching the intelligence profile. Positive identification, Blackwood breathed. That's Khalid Rahman. Rahman faced east, preparing for morning prayers. The guards positioned themselves to the sides, leaving a clear line of fire. 90 seconds. That's all the intelligence said they'd have. 90 seconds from appearance to withdrawal. Wind holding 9.2 miles per hour, west-southwest, Blackwood called, his voice barely above a whisper. Thermals rising consistent, mirage stable, range unchanged, 2,410 meters. He paused, then added quietly, "You have green light. For Thomas. For Nathaniel. Send it when ready." Kira's final mental checklist ran in seconds. Range confirmed, 2,410 meters. Elevation, 19.6 MOA for the downward angle and distance. Wind, 6.4 MOA right for deflection. Temperature, 64 degrees. Humidity, 41%. Barometric pressure, 25.86. Coriolis effect, 0.4 MOA right at this latitude. All variables accounted for. Calculated, integrated into her hold. Her breathing slowed further. 4 breaths per minute now. Heart rate dropping to 44 beats per minute. The crosshairs settled high and right of Rahman's chest. 19.6 MOA above, 6.4 MOA right. Trusting mathematics and physics and decades of accumulated wisdom from the men who taught her. Through the scope, Rahman appeared tiny across the vast distance. A human being reduced to a silhouette, a target, a problem to be solved with precision and will. But he wasn't just a target. He was the man who'd planned the ambush that killed Nathaniel Blackwood, who'd built the IED network that killed 23 Americans, who'd orchestrated attacks that brought grief to families who'd never asked for war but bore its cost anyway. Kira's finger took up the trigger slack. 3 pounds of pressure, 4 pounds. Focus absolute. The world existed only in the scope picture now. Crosshairs, target, wind indicators, the mathematics of justice. For her father who taught her to shoot. For Nathaniel Blackwood, who died without learning his father's skills. For every name on casualty lists that stretch back decades. For the tradition of warriors who protected those who couldn't protect themselves. The trigger broke clean at 4.4 pounds. The Barrett erupted with massive recoil that drove into her shoulder like a sledgehammer. Pain exploded through the joint, white-hot and catastrophic. She felt something tear inside, heard a sound like fabric ripping. The agony was so intense it grayed her vision for a moment. But she'd positioned correctly, absorbed the recoil through skeletal structure, even as tissue failed. And through discipline and will that transcended pain, she stayed in the scope. Watching. Waiting. 3.6 seconds of bullet flight. The bullet left the muzzle at 2,710 feet per second, arcing upward through thin mountain air, reaching the apex of its trajectory, then descending toward the target 2,410 meters away. Wind pushed it right, 6.4 MOA of drift. Gravity pulled it down, 19.6 MOA of drop. The Coriolis effect from Earth's rotation added microscopic deflection. Thermals from the valley floor created updrafts. All of Kira's calculations, all of Blackwood's observations, all the preparation and training and dedication compressed into those 3.6 seconds. Blackwood watched through his spotting scope, his voice steady despite the emotion beneath. Flight looks good. Tracking. Tracking. The bullet descended toward Khalid Rahman, who had no idea that death was traveling toward him at nearly 3 times the speed of sound. That the judgment of nations was about to arrive with precision measured in inches. Impact. Rahman's chest exploded in red mist. The massive hydrostatic shock from the .50 caliber round threw him backward off his feet with violent finality. One moment he was standing at the balcony railing, the next he was gone, simply erased from the fight. The guards froze in confusion, their minds unable to process what had just happened. One looked down at Rahman's body, the other spun, searching for the threat, his rifle sweeping the mountains but finding nothing. Blackwood's voice cracked with emotion for the first time in the mission. Center mass, confirm kill, target down. Then barely audible, for Nathaniel. The compound erupted into chaos. Guards ran in every direction. Someone fired an AK blindly into the mountains. An RPG launcher appeared, fired a rocket at empty terrain 400 meters from Kira's position. Radio chatter panicked, disorganized. The sound of an organization whose head had just been surgically removed. Kira tried to chamber a second round, but her right arm wouldn't respond. The shoulder was destroyed, the limb hanging useless. The pain was beyond anything she'd experienced, threatening to drag her into unconsciousness. Blackwood keyed his radio, his voice professional, despite what Kira knew he was feeling. Overwatch to assault actual. Primary target neutralized. Compound in disarray. Defenders disorganized. You are cleared hot for assault. 3 kilometers away, 2 Black Hawk helicopters lifted off, carrying Hollister's SEAL team toward the compound for the follow-on assault. But as the helicopters approached, visible as dark shapes against the morning sky, a PKM machine gun opened fire from a rooftop position that hadn't been visible in the initial reconnaissance. Heavy caliber rounds stitched through the air, tracers marking deadly paths toward the Blackhawks. Hollister's urgent voice came over the radio. Taking fire! Taking fire! PKM rooftop position. Blackwood spotted it through his scope. Rooftop gun, 2290 meters, 10 o'clock from your last shot. Kira tried to swing the Barrett left with her right hand. Nothing. The arm was dead weight, nerves severed or damaged beyond function. But her left arm still worked. She used her left hand to work the bolt, chambering the second round with awkward but functional motion. Shifted her body, bringing her left shoulder behind the rifle instead of her right. The position was wrong, unnatural. Everything felt backwards. But there was no time for perfect. The helicopters were taking fire. Americans were in danger. Blackwood's call was rapid, urgent. 2290 meters, 15 degrees left, wind same, less drop, hold 16 MOA high, 6 right. Send it now. 8 seconds from target identification to shot. No time for careful calculation, just instinct and experience and trust in the fundamentals her father had taught her when she was 9 years old. Kira's left hand found the trigger. The position was awkward. The rifle cant was wrong. Her cheek weld was off. But the crosshairs were on target. She fired left-handed. The recoil hit her left shoulder, different but equally brutal. The Barrett roared its defiance across the valley. The PKM gunner jerked backward, hit center mass. The machine gun fell silent, clattering onto the roof. "Target down," Blackwood confirmed. "PKM neutralized." The Black Hawk swept in, SEALs fast roping onto the compound roof. Hollister's team moved with practiced precision, breaching doors, clearing rooms. The fight was brief and violent. Defenders who'd been disorganized by Rahman's death either surrendered or died in quick exchanges of gunfire. 4 minutes after the initial shot, Hollister's voice came through clearly. "Compound secure. Rahman confirmed KIA. 2 secondary commanders captured. Intel materials being collected. 0 SEAL casualties." A pause, then his voice carried unmistakable respect. "Outstanding shooting, Phantom. Best overwatch I've ever seen." Kira and Blackwood remained in position for 20 more minutes, providing cover while the SEALs exploited the target. Only when Hollister confirmed they were ready for extraction did Kira finally pull back from her rifle. Her right shoulder was a massive fire. She could see swelling already forming, the joint distorted. When she tried to move the arm, nothing happened. Complete rotator cuff tear. 3 bone fragments, the medic had said. He'd been right, but the mission was complete. Rahman would never kill another American, never plan another ambush, never build another IED network. Blackwood was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Pride, certainly, respect, but also something else. Peace. Maybe the kind that came from completing something that needed completing. 2 perfect shots under impossible conditions, he said quietly. "Your father would be proud. I'm proud." He looked at her shoulder, saw the damage, his weathered face creasing with concern. "Can you move?" "Left arm works, right arm is done, but I can walk." "Then let's get you home." They broke down the equipment, Blackwood handling most of it while Kira worked one-handed. The exfiltration took 90 minutes, moving carefully back through the route they'd infiltrated, avoiding the area where they'd encountered the Taliban patrol. The Black Hawk extraction lifted them out at 0940, carrying them back toward FOB Atlas and whatever came next. But for now, in this moment, the mission was complete. The shot was made. The debt was paid. The Black Hawk touched down at FOB Atlas just after 1000 hours. Rotor wash kicked up a wall of dust that turned the landing zone briefly opaque. Kira stepped off with her rifle case secured across her back with her left arm, her right hanging useless at her side. What she wasn't prepared for was the reception waiting beyond the landing zone. The entire task force had assembled. Admiral Shaw stood at the front, flanked by Master Chief Murphy and Lieutenant Commander Hollister, whose uniform still showed dust from the compound assault. Behind them, at least 40 SEALs and support personnel stood in loose formation. As Kira cleared the rotor wash and became fully visible, Admiral Shaw began to clap. The sound was taken up immediately by every person present. Thunderous applause that echoed off the HESCO barriers and reinforced buildings. Kira stopped mid-step, genuinely surprised. Snipers worked in shadows. Their successes were measured in lives saved rather than public recognition. This kind of acknowledgement felt foreign, but she read the faces of the men applauding and understood. This wasn't about her. This was about the mission, about Rahman being erased from the fight, about American warriors coming home alive because the shot had been perfect. Blackwood touched her good elbow lightly, a small gesture of encouragement, and they walked forward together. Shaw waited until the applause died down, then addressed the assembled task force with command voice. "Gather around. What happened today deserves to be acknowledged." The crowd tightened, SEALs moving closer. 48 hours ago, Shaw began, I stood in a briefing room and questioned whether Staff Sergeant Kiera Dalton belonged on this mission. I looked at her uniform, her rank, her gender, and I let my assumptions cloud my judgment. He paused, and Kiera saw something rare in a flag officer. Public admission of error. I almost made the biggest mistake of my career. I almost turned away one of the finest shooters I've ever encountered because I judged her by everything except what actually matters. Her skill, her dedication, her courage under fire. Shaw turned to face Kira directly. This morning, Staff Sergeant Dalton made a shot that most marksmen would consider impossible. 2,410 meters across difficult terrain in variable wind conditions with thermal currents and a steep downward angle. One shot, one kill. The target was eliminated with precision that defies statistical probability. He gestured toward Hollister. The follow-on assault was successful. We captured 2 additional high-value targets along with significant intelligence materials. Most importantly, every member of the assault team came home alive. The weight of that statement settled over the group. In a profession where casualty lists were part of reality, bringing everyone home was the highest measure of success. Shaw reached into his pocket and withdrew a small case. Opening it revealed a challenge coin, the task force's commemorative token given only for exceptional performance. Staff Sergeant Kiera Dalton, on behalf of this task force and the United States Naval Special Warfare Command, I present you with this coin in recognition of extraordinary marksmanship and professionalism in combat operations. Kiera accepted the coin with her left hand, feeling its weight. Just metal, just a token, but it represented something deeper, respect earned through performance. Thank you, Admiral, but I was just doing my job. Colonel Blackwood's wind calls were perfect. The assault team executed flawlessly. This was a team effort. That's exactly what makes you exceptional, Shaw replied. You understand that no one succeeds alone. He turned to address the group again. But make no mistake, that shot was hers, and it was magnificent. Hollister stepped forward. Staff Sergeant, my team wants you to know we've worked with a lot of snipers over the years. What you did today was the best Overwatch support we've ever received. You gave us the confidence to execute knowing you had our backs. Master Chief Murphy added his voice. In 22 years as a SEAL, I've learned that capability doesn't care about gender, service branch, or rank. It only cares about skill and heart. You've got both in abundance, Phantom. One by one, the SEALs approached. Some shook her left hand, careful of her injury. Some asked questions about the shot, genuine professional curiosity. Others simply offered respect with a nod. But it was Shaw's next gesture that surprised her. He turned to Blackwood, produced a second challenge coin, and his voice took on additional weight. Colonel Wyatt Blackwood, I called you out of retirement because I needed the best wind reader in the business. But you gave us something more valuable than meteorological expertise. You passed the torch. You took the knowledge of 40 years in combat and transferred it to the next generation. Shaw's eyes held genuine emotion. For 40 years of service from Central America to Afghanistan, for being the mentor we needed even more than the spotter. Welcome home, Granite. Blackwood accepted the coin with a hand that trembled slightly. He came to attention, despite being in civilian clothes, rendered a perfect salute. Shaw returned it with equal precision. When Blackwood's hand came down, Kiera saw tears tracking through the dust on his weathered face. This wasn't just about the mission for him. This was closure, the debt to his son partially repaid. The knowledge he'd never gotten to pass to Nathaniel, instead given to Thomas Raines's daughter. After the ceremony dispersed, Hollister approached Kiera one final time. He carried a small package wrapped in brown paper. My brother Cole asked me to give you this. He wanted to send it to Phantom, but we never knew how to find you. Kiera opened the package carefully with her left hand. Inside was a photograph. A young man in SEAL uniform holding a baby girl, both of them smiling. On the back, handwritten, Emma Rose Hollister, 6 months old. She has a future because you made 6 impossible shots. Thank you, Phantom. Lieutenant Cole Hollister. He named his daughter after his grandmother, Wade Hollister said quietly, the woman who raised him when our parents died. He wanted you to know that Emma will grow up hearing about the warrior who saved her father. Not your name, he'll keep that secret, but the legend. Kiera looked at the photograph for a long moment, then carefully tucked it into her pocket beside her father's picture. Tell him, tell him it was an honor. Hollister nodded, started to leave, then turned back. One more thing. Admiral Shaw wanted me to tell you, his godson Cole is putting in his retirement papers next year. He's going to be there for Emma's childhood. He's going to coach her soccer team and teach her to swim and walk her down the aisle someday. All because of you. He extended his hand one final time. We're even now, Phantom. The SEAL community's debt to you is paid. The medical tent was cooler than the outside air, climate-controlled and smelling of antiseptic. The doctor was a Navy commander with 20 years of experience written in the gray at his temples. He examined Kira's shoulder with gentle but thorough hands, then pulled up the X-ray images on a light board. Complete rotator cuff tear, 3 bone fragments floating in the joint, significant damage to the surrounding tissue. He turned to face her. Staff Sergeant, your career as a precision shooter is over. You'll never fire a rifle again. Probably nothing heavier than a pistol. Kira looked at the X-ray, seeing the damage rendered in black and white. The joint that had absorbed thousands of rounds of Barrett recoil finally pushed beyond its limits. At least it was perfect, the doctor said quietly. Kira smiled despite the pain. No, sir, it was 2 perfect shots. That's twice as good. 3 years later, Fort Campbell looked the same as it always had. The ranges, the training facilities, the endless cycle of soldiers learning the skills that might keep them alive. But Kira Dalton was different now. She stood on the Fort Campbell Range with Specialist Harper Sinclair, teaching wind reading as the sun set over Kentucky. The young specialist held a training rifle, practicing breathing techniques. Kira's right arm remained in its permanent brace. See the way those trees move at different distances? Kira pointed with her left hand. Near trees barely shifting, that's 2 miles per hour. Mid-range bending more, 5 miles per hour. Far trees really moving, 8 miles per hour. That's your wind gradient. Harper nodded, absorbing the knowledge the same way Kira had absorbed it from her father 30 years ago. The same way Kira had absorbed it from Blackwood 3 years ago. The manual can't teach you this, Kira continued. You have to learn to see what the land is telling you. Technology fails, computers die, but the land always speaks truth. She pulled out Blackwood's logbook, worn now from 3 more years of teaching, and opened to a fresh page. Fort Campbell, 2026, she wrote in her precise handwriting. Specialist Harper Sinclair, first qualification, 1,920 meters, wind 7 miles per hour southwest, temperature 68 degrees Fahrenheit, perfect fundamentals. This student will be excellent. Harper watched her write, understanding the significance. Ma'am, can I ask you something? Always. The shot in Afghanistan, the one they talk about, was it worth what it cost you? Kira looked at her right arm, useless now. The career ended at 29 years old. Then she looked at the students on the range. 8 female snipers in this class alone. Impossible 5 years ago. Yes, she said simply, because it wasn't about me. It was about the mission, about the people who came home alive, about the tradition continuing. She handed the logbook to Harper. Your turn. Make your entry. Harper took the pen with trembling hands and wrote beneath Kira's entry, Instructor SSG. Kira Dalton taught me, a rifle is iron and wood. I am the weapon. I will not miss. Specialist Harper Sinclair. Kira smiled. That was her father's voice, echoing forward through time. In her office, the Barrett M82, serial number M82-051-TR, sat in its display case, retired with honor. Beside it, 3 photographs formed a timeline. Thomas Raines, 1991, Desert Storm, 29 years old. Kira Dalton, 2023, Afghanistan, 29 years old. Harper Sinclair, 2026, Fort Campbell, 24 years old. The tradition passing forward, father to daughter, mentor to student, warrior to warrior. Kira looked up at the darkening sky, Somewhere she knew her father and Wyatt Blackwood were watching, making sure the next generation understood. Iron and wood don't win wars. Will and precision do. The weapon is the warrior who holds it. In the tradition, the sacred tradition of those who stand between wolves and sheep, would never die. Not while warriors like Harper Sinclair were willing to learn. Not while teachers like Kira Dalton were willing to pass the torch. Not while the line remained unbroken. Harper chambered a training round, settled into position, and prepared to shoot. Kira stood beside her, watching, guiding, just as Thomas Raines had once stood beside her. Just as Wyatt Blackwood had stood beside her 3 years ago on an Afghan mountainside. The circle, complete. The legacy secure, the tradition eternal.